So a lot of people lost money on IndyMac. But for some reason, IndyMac was not big enough to cause a nationwide panic. So Paulson probably thought, hey, maybe it's okay to shut down banks. So when the Lehman problem came up, Paulson just let it go. And that was the beginning of the madness. Even the IndyMac, during my days, when I was at the Federal Reserve back 25 years ago, I don't think Paul Volcker would have allowed IndyMac to die like that. Because if there's a 5% chance that things could go wrong, in those days, Federal Reserve went there to cover it. But Paulson have no such experience. Paulson is basically a trader. And trader, he is probably a great trader, buying and selling every 5 minutes or 3 minutes. But fixing a banking system needs a very different type of expertise. And Paulson did not have that expertise. So he just let Lehman go, and the whole world came crashing down. I thought that was most unfortunate because there were many examples in the past of banking crises of this sort. In Japan, for example, we had a long-term credit bank which went under in summer of 1998. It was a huge bank, had a trading relationship, derivative trading with thousands of counterparties all around the world. So what did Bank of Japan do? Bank of Japan sent hundreds of people, 300 I was told, to all the counterparties of long-term credit bank and make sure that they will not lose any money, make sure that they feel safe with their relationship they had. And once they assured every one of these counterparties of long-term credit bank, then they shut the bank down and took over the responsibilities. Lehman is 3 times larger than long-term credit bank. And what did Paulson do? He just said, goodbye. And the whole world just came crashing down. I thought that was most incompetent. I've never seen anyone so incompetent on the issue of this sort. I wish Paul Volcker or someone else were there to say, you don't do that with someone as big as Lehman. And then, as you know, when the whole thing started collapsing, the AIG, the big insurance companies, began to crumble. And suddenly Paulson realized that he screwed up. He decided to save AIG within 24 hours after he let the Lehman go. And I thought that was the end of the problem. But unfortunately, Paulson came out, and then a lot of people start asking, why Lehman was allowed to go, but not AIG? And Paulson answered that incorrectly. Paulson should have said, from now on, all banks will be saved. That's what he should have said. But guess what he actually said? He said, well, we go by case-by-case basis. When you have a systemic crisis, that's the last thing you're supposed to say. And no one told him that. So once he said that, even though Federal Reserve put in $100 billion to save AIG, the market started collapsing again. And the damage got bigger and bigger and bigger. And finally, 48 hours later, he had to come up with something. So he came up with this $700 billion package to buy the illiquid assets of the banks. But I thought that was completely useless, and I wrote in my reports that this is completely useless, because if you buy $700 billion of assets at depressed prices, it does not help the banks at all. Suppose bank had an asset worth $100 before. Now the value is down to $20. And the government says, I like to buy that for $20. Well, if you sell that to $20, the bank still only have $20. It doesn't solve any of the problems. Bank needs capital, not money. And that's why I argue strongly for capital injection. And I'm so glad that finally, even Paulson realized that capital injection is necessary. And the Europeans apparently understood this problem far better than Paulson. So Europeans put in a lot of capital injection with so little questions asked. And then Europeans put pressure on the Paulson, Japanese put pressure on Paulson, and finally Paulson decided that, okay, capital injection. Because the final customer, United States, is weakening so sharply. So it's not just US problem, it's now our problem. And in that case, in that sense, we have to think in two things. What should the United States should do, and what we should do here in Asia. For the United States, we have to see increase in government spending. Increase in government spending. That's the only way to keep the US economy from collapsing. I say government spending because that's what Japan used to keep our economy from collapsing. Now, Japan actually went through something really horrible. As many Taiwanese banks too, but in Japanese banks, you have to have a collateral to borrow money. And collateral is usually the real estate. So in Japan, real estate was a very important in entire financing. This is what happened to Japan's real estate market. This is commercial real estate, by the way. This is the bubble. It went all the way to those very high levels, and then it collapsed. Nice Mount Fuji right here. And then it collapsed all the way to the price last seen in 1973. From here to here, the decline is 87%. 87%. Just imagine if Taipei land prices fell 87%. What kind of economy do you think we have left here? Or the same question in the United States. What happens if the Manhattan or San Francisco real estate prices fell 87%? What would be there? Probably nothing. But look what happened to Japan's GDP. During the bubble days, when everybody's feeling rich, of course the GDP went very well. GDP growth went very rapidly. But even after the collapse of the bubble, Japanese GDP did not fall below the peak of the bubble. This is the peak of the bubble, and we were always above the peak of the bubble, even after losing 87% of the land values. How did we do that? Well, we did it by government spending. Japanese government was in there borrowing and spending money, borrowing and spending money. So even though we were facing a massive depression possibilities, we actually never fell into one. I mean, we made some policy mistakes here, because we had a small negative growth. But we quickly put in the fiscal spending and kept the economy going. This is the result of that. This is the Japanese government spending. This is the bubble. And when the bubble burst, naturally economy is much weaker. And the tax revenue started showing much weakness. Now, under ordinary circumstances, when the revenue falls, you expect government to cut spending.